I'm not really sure how to start this post without sounding a little unhinged, to say it the least. A friend of mine referred me to this page after I told her what has been going on with me lately, as people on this page seem to be discussing similar issues. Before anyone says anything about how I should maybe talk to a professional instead of relying on strangers on a message board, I have an appointment set for next Monday with a psychiatrist. I've also changed the batteries in the carbon monoxide sensors in my house, just in case a gas leak or something was causing me to hallucinate. But no such luck. Alright, here goes nothing. When I was a kid, about 6 or 7 years old, I moved in with my dad in Montana. My parents split up when I was too young to remember it, and my mom lived in Florida with her new husband, Carl, and his 3 kids. My dad offered to take me while my mom got settled in Florida, and then offered to take full custody of me after about a year of us living together. My mom consented, and I permanently lived with my dad in his house. It was about 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, with a big piece of property out back and no neighbors for miles. The thing that I remember the most about the house though was the basement. My dad was something of an amateur hunter and craftsman, a real salt of the earth kind of guy. He was nice enough, but he lacked some kind of warmth to him. He was nice to me. He always held my hand when we were in public, but I don't ever remember him hugging me. Like, when he smiled, it never fully reached his eyes. I don't think he wanted a kid, and I think my mom saw me as a reminder of her first failed marriage. So I think he was trying his best to be the bigger person and try to make my childhood pleasant despite being generally unwanted. Anyway, he would spend hours down in his basement working on various projects. He did taxidermy on the stuff he hunted, which really creeped me out, but it seemed to make him really happy, so I couldn't really complain. When he was happy, everything was just a little brighter in our otherwise grey house. Our house was situated on a big plot of land with a thick forest area in the back. Dad had fenced off the tree line so I wouldn't wander off and get lost somewhere, and added a swing set for me near the back door. There was a tiny window by the back door that I could see into from my swing set that led to the basement. When I cheerfully told my dad that I could watch him do his projects while I played from there, he promptly put up blackout curtains. I was a little confused and a little hurt by this, but he told me he just liked his privacy while he worked. I didn't have any friends, and our nearest neighbors were miles away, so I would entertain myself in the house with games, the TV, and playing out back on the swings. The house, despite only having 2 occupants, was loud. Dad's power tools were audible from the living room, despite the thick paneling he had installed down in the basement shortly after I moved in. And sometimes I could swear I heard the whimpering or little cries. Once or twice I heard what sounded like an outright scream. He just said it was the creaking of the wood flooring. It was an old house, he said. It breathed like a person. The way he said that, cryptically almost, really stuck with me. I stopped bringing it up after a while. Sometimes at night I would hear the little whimpering creaks, and occasionally they would just sound a little too human. I tried to stay in my room and shut the door, worried whatever was causing those little creaks wasn't just the house breathing, but something out there in the darkness. One night, around my 8th birthday, that fear was realized. My dad had already come out of the basement after finishing his work for the night and had shut off all the hall lights. I could always hear his heavy footsteps up the carpeted stairs and see the light streaming in from beneath my door suddenly go out, signaling it was time to sleep. Usually, I won't leave my room after that. I didn't want to risk waking him up. I did that once, and he was miserable the next day, snapping at every little thing. He scared me when he was like that. This night though, I was so thirsty. I just wanted a little cup of water to bring back to my room. After weighing out the risks, I silently tiptoed outside of my room and down the carpeted stairs, trying my best to blend into the silence and darkness. When I reached the bottom of the stairs though, I saw the basement door. It was open. It was never ever open. It gaped open, its dark maw staring at me, threatening me. I was frantic to get away from the door. Something in me just knew that whatever was down there, for whatever reason, I wasn't supposed to see. I don't know if it was just that childhood fear of the dark or fear over my dad's reaction, but I was well and truly scared. Before I could retreat back upstairs, I heard a whimper in the corner of the kitchen. I reflexively flinched and then realized what I heard was distinctly human, or at the very least, animal-like. Thinking that some kind of creature had gotten into the house from the woods, I peeked around the corner to see a scraggly little girl, perhaps a few years younger than myself, curled into a ball on the floor. She wore dirty pajamas that were in tatters, and her hair was long, dark, and horribly matted. She was so emaciated, she hardly looked human. I was frozen as she looked up at me. Her eyes were milky and glazed over. It didn't seem like she could see me. She must have been blind. She just stared in silence. A moment passed and neither of us moved. Finally, she opened her mouth and whispered something. It was more of a raspy hiss than human speech. I cautiously leaned towards her and asked her what she said. She opened her mouth wider, looking almost inhuman as she did, and I saw it. The stump of a tongue. It was freshly severed. She garbled something at me, scaring me half out of my wits. I was so scared I passed out right there on the kitchen floor. This spectral, haunting thing leaning over me, slurring a repeating phrase. Gave me. When I woke up the next morning, I was back in bed. The only evidence of my trip to the kitchen was a full glass of water beside my bed. It was just a glass of water, but it chilled me to the bone. When I came downstairs, my dad was making pancakes and he greeted me with one of his signature fake smiles. The basement door was closed once again. I never saw it left open again. So, back to the present day issue. It's been about 15 years since that incident, and I now live in Florida, about a 20-minute drive from my mom. After college, her health started failing, and she reached out to me in an attempt to reconnect and make amends. I was hesitant at first, but I've always really wanted a relationship with her, so I agreed. We've actually become really close, and I take care of her when my stepdad car is working or needs a hand. My new house is a one-story, two-bedroom house in a fairly safe neighborhood. I live by myself and rarely have any issues, but lately my sanity has been challenged. I'm not sure if it's the stress of my mom being sick or if I'm just losing it, but I keep having a late-night visitor. It's her, that girl from my childhood. She's older now, like she grew up with me. I keep hearing scratching from below the floorboards, like someone is trying to burrow their way out of the ground or escape a basement. Like I said, I live in Florida. We don't have basements because of the high water table. I hear the whimpers, the creaks, and the cries of my childhood home every night. It's impossible, I know, but somehow it's happening and I can't make it stop. I'm seeing her all over my house now, especially at night. She keeps repeating that damn phrase, her jaw opened uncomfortably wide. That stump from where her tongue should be, wagging around in there. I just want her to go away. It's almost been a month of this. I don't know what I can do to make it stop, and I am at my wit's end. I've screamed at her to leave, but she just goes silent for a second, then starts chanting all over again. I don't actually believe in ghosts or anything, contrary to what the title of this post may imply. But if this continues, I may call in a medium. Anything to just make it stop. So, if anyone has any advice, or maybe a clue to what could cause this, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Update. Hi guys, since last night it's gotten worse, so much worse. I see her everywhere now, all the time, even outside the confines of my home. Last night she stood over me in bed all night, just gurgling at me. I can feel her spittle on my face as she talked with what must now be a broken jaw dangling out at me. I couldn't sleep. I just closed my eyes and prayed that it would stop. She looks worse every day. It's like she's decaying. Her skin is mottled and looks rotten. Her milky eyes look like marbles rolling around their socket. She won't leave me alone for even a second. I followed your advice and contacted a medium. She took a look around my house for all of 15 minutes, stared into my bedroom from the doorway, then took off running. Despite her fake tan, she turned white as a sheet. I guess that was a waste of $400. That's what I get for looking on Facebook Marketplace for spiritual help. It's left me more broke than before and feeling really uneasy. I moved up my psychiatry appointment to this morning. Without sleep, waiting till Monday just wasn't feasible. The psychiatrist says if I'm auditory and visual hallucinations, then I'm probably having some kind of schizophrenic break or a psychotic episode. He prescribed me something. I don't think I'm going to take it. My gut tells me that this isn't in my head, at least not entirely. There's got to be a reason this entity, whatever she is so persistent. I called my dad and asked him if I could come visit the house for a bit, and he seemed okay with it. I didn't tell him why, but can you blame me? He would probably commit me. Carl says he can manage mom for a week if I need to take some time to see dad. My flight is tonight. I guess I'll update you all from Montana. Wish me luck. I figured I would put these updates together since it's only been one day. I got to my dad's house yesterday and it's been really nostalgic. I'm back in my childhood bedroom on the second floor. The house is much quieter than it used to be. Dad spends less time in the basement, if any at all. I asked him why he's no longer as interested in his hobbies down there, and he told me his back isn't what it used to be, so he isn't physically able to do this work anymore. I'm not really sure how a bad back would prevent him from doing taxidermy and carpentry, but I guess it's not my business. It's also padlocked now, which he didn't offer an explanation for, and I didn't ask. That's kind of how our relationship has always been. I feel like asking too many questions would only bother him. Now, back to the main point. I haven't seen the girl since I arrived, save for one instance. When I got up last night, she was sitting in the corner of my room, curled into a ball. She almost looked pitiable, if not for the repulsive decay of her body. I got up and crouched beside her. She wasn't speaking or doing her chant, and I wondered if something had happened. Maybe this silence signaled the end of her torment for me. The silence, while at first welcome, became eerie. She looked up at me, her dark hair parting down the middle of her pallid, rotting face, those milky eyes staring vacantly in my direction. Her mouth opened and I prepared myself to hear her chant again, but the silence continued. I stared at her, her jaw dangling like a ventriloquist dummy. Then she softly groaned. The air from her open mouth smelled like death and must. I stifled a gag. A rush of wriggling, white insects began to pour out from her open mouth. She wretched as a swarm of maggots spilling from her mouth intensified. Tears streamed from her vacant eyes as the insects continued coming. I fell back, crawling back away from her as quickly as my body could carry me. I involuntarily cried out, and my dad came running, throwing open my bedroom door and frantically looking around. It may have been my imagination, but I swear I saw his eyes lock on the girl. Something like recognition and perhaps fear glinted in his eyes. When I turned to look back at her though, she was gone. I told my dad that I had a nightmare and it just startled me out of bed. He nodded, gave me a strange look and left the room, wishing me good night. I returned to sentiment and crawled back into bed. I didn't sleep again that night. Since then, there's been no sign of her. It's only been 24 hours, but I'm hopeful. This is the longest I've been without her. My dad has been a little weird today, but I'm sure he was just startled by my episode last night. The only thing that's really bothered me are the bugs. I was having lunch in the living room and I saw one of them squeeze its way under the cellar door. I watched it as it inched its way across the floor before it moved out of view from my vantage point on the couch. I've seen a few more crawl out from under the door in the past hour in groups. It's really starting to make my skin crawl. I told Dad he has a bug problem and pointed them out. He just kind of nodded and stared at the door. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. I will keep you all posted. Sorry for the delay in updates. Things have taken a bit of a turn. I'm not really sure how much of this I should talk about. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I guess this is the only place I can talk about it, since it's kind of anonymous. I left my dad's house last night. I can't stay there anymore. I'm in a hotel in the next town over from his, and I have a flight back home tomorrow morning. He keeps calling me, but I don't have the strength to pick up the phone. After the incident 2 days ago, she still hasn't shown up. Not like she used to anyway. My dad went into town the day after the incident for groceries and other essentials. It's about a 45-minute drive to the nearest town with a shopping center. I offered to go run the errands for him, but it's winter and he said he'd rather take his truck. It's 4-wheel drive and meant for difficult terrain, unlike my rental car. He's particular about who drives his truck. I wasn't even allowed when I was practicing for my driver's test, so I stayed at home while he went to the shop, expecting him to be home in a few hours. While I was alone in the house, I began to hear scratching from the basement. I tuned it out at first, being so used to strange sounds in Dad's house from his activities in the basement. After about half an hour of business as usual though, it struck me that I was alone, and no one should be in the basement. A bead of cold sweat dribbled down my temple. The scratching continued. I looked at the basement door, eyeing it warily. The padlock was off the door, dangling limply from a chain attached to the wall. Dad must have undone it when I wasn't looking. Maybe he had to grab something down there and forgot to lock up before he left. My childhood fear of the basement and that intense feeling I shouldn't go down there blared like an alarm from my racing mind. But I needed to know what the scratching was. I don't know why I was so curious. I wish to God I hadn't been. I thought it could be some poor creature trapped down there, like a raccoon or a squirrel. I took a deep, calming breath, turned the handle and opened the door. Before me was a long, dark, exceedingly narrow wooden staircase. I searched in vain for a light switch, but to no avail. I finally settled for inching my way down the stairs, groping the scratchy handrail for balance and direction in the abysmal darkness. After a minute or two of struggling, I finally reached the bottom of the stairs. The air was heavy down there and smelled vaguely foul. The scent of death was a fine mist in the air. I saw the faint glint of a light bulb dangling near what I assumed to be the ceiling, outlined by the sliver of light visible from the upstairs doorway at this angle. I pulled the cord attached to it, lighting up the room. The air whooshed out of my lungs and I staggered back towards the stairs. It was horrible. The room was a dungeon. There were chains and shackles built into the walls and ceilings. A drain was installed in the floor, and the red staining on the ground, specifically the thick ring around the drain itself, spoke to its heavy use. A small, wishful part of my brain thought that it was for his taxidermy. He must have skinned the animals here. That must be what it was. But the pair of handcuffs rigged in the center of the room, swinging softly, mocked my naivety. Suddenly, every strange sound, putrid smell, and waking hour that my father spent within this basement made sense. The power tools weren't for woodworking. The screaming and crying wasn't the TV or the house breathing. And he wasn't skinning animals. I lurched into the corner of the room and vomited onto the floor. I puked a few more times, followed by some dry heaving before shakily straightening myself up. Behind me, something scratched on the wall. I spun around, looking straight at the wood-paneled back wall. My stomach turned again. I knew what would be back there. I don't know how, but I knew. The picture was becoming clearer with every passing second. I grabbed a hammer from the woodwork table by the stairs, willing myself to ignore the stains on the metal tool. I wedged it into the gap between the middle of the two panels and tugged. Nothing. I braced myself, putting my foot up against the adjacent panel. I tugged on the hammer again, leaning back with all my weight. Still nothing. But the gap looked a little wider. The rancid smell seeping out of the wall was confirming my fears. I leaned back to tug again when the panel snapped and gave way, sending me hurtling to the floor in front of the wall. I looked up and met the dead eyes of the girl. She was probably around 20, or she had been. She was a rotting corpse, just as she had been in my hallucinations. It hit me with another wave of nausea that she had only been decaying for a couple of months at most. The lack of refrigeration, moisture and bug damage made her look ghastly, but she was strangely well preserved despite it. Someone, my dad, had cared for her. I stared at her eyes. The scarring from chemical burns around her eyes were thick, purplish grey and wrinkled. He had blinded her. A carrion beetle squirmed beneath her right eyelid before crawling out of the socket. I rolled over and retched again. She had been here, alive, all this time. For 15 years, this girl had been here, subjected to God knows what, right beneath my feet. He went down there each day to torture her. Then he came upstairs and made me pancakes. The girl in the kitchen wasn't a ghost, she was very alive. A frightened child trying to escape. And what did I do? I ran away. I left her to be taken back by him. I felt someone breathe against the back of my neck. I was frozen in fear, staring at the rotting body of the ghost that tormented me. A woman's voice whispered, the pronunciation weak and wobbly. Yevni, Yevni, Yevni. Please, I murmured, tears silently streaming down my cheeks, my heart feeling heavy and frozen in my chest. Please, I don't understand. The woman whimpered before saying clearly now, Save me. Why didn't you save me? I gasped and spun around, but no one was there. In the same instant, I heard the front door open and my dad called out for me from the living room. Panic coursed through my entire body. I scrambled up the stairs, eyes wild. Would he kill me now that I know his secret? I hated the thought, but what was stopping him? Fatherly affection? Did he even have that? Was he an emotionless psycho? A sociopath? The coldness in his gaze and other strange traits finally made sense. Another question burned in my mind. How many more like her were there? I stood in the threshold of the basement to see him dumbfounded, standing still in the living room. He still had his grocery bags. He didn't move. He didn't speak. We just stared at each other in silence, in understanding. I knew, he knew, I knew. Where we would go from here was anyone's guess. I didn't give him any time to decide. I ran past him and out of the door. He didn't even try to stop me. I left all my belongings at the house, leaving with just my work stuff and wallet, which through sheer dumb luck was in my carry-on bag in the car. I know my next move should be to call the police, but I don't know if I can sentence my father to life in prison or death. I know he deserves it, but in some strange way, I still love him. I don't know what to do. Right now, I'm just frozen, trying to process this all. Maybe that's why he let me go. Maybe this lingering affection for him was what he was counting on. I don't know what to think anymore. I think this is gonna be my last post. The original problem has been solved, but at what cost? She doesn't appear anymore while I'm awake. However, every night when I go to sleep, she waits for me in my dreams. She always asks the same question, and I never have an answer. I don't think I ever will. Why didn't you save me?